Hi, everybody, and welcome to another interview here at Metal Blast. Today, I'm going to show you an interview that I did with Einar Selvik of Wardruna last year around November or December. We are releasing it now because it coincides with the release of Kvitravn, their newest record. This interview was really interesting for me because I was able to discuss with Einar not just the issue of music, which I think everybody else is discussing, but also animism, the religion or philosophy that inspires him and inspired Wardruna itself in the creation of the music as well as the direction that they are taking. Speaking of direction, when I asked him what is it that he's trying to achieve with Wardruna, he said something quite nice, which is giving a voice to the past. In other words, connecting with all of this history and all of these ancestors and all of this culture that we have forgotten. And of course, what is interesting about that is that it's not exclusively related to Scandinavian mythology, of course, although Wardruna certainly is. This idea of being interested in your ancestors, in your history, and in your culture is something that transcends borders, and we can all relate to that regardless of where it is that we come from. I really think that this is a very interesting interview. Einar was extremely helpful, extremely kind, even though I know for a fact he was doing one interview after the other as part of the press days that musicians need to do when they release an album. So he was a really good sport about going through all of the questions with me. I'm sure that you'll enjoy it, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Stay metal. Started in 2003 by two former members of the legendary black metal band Gorgoroth, Wardruna are a Nordic folk band from Norway. After a decade with indie recordings in which they released 4 full-length albums, they are now part of Sony Music, with whom they'll release Kvitravn in January of 2021. Einar Selvik is the vocalist and founder of the band, and he joins me today. Einar, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So first, the obvious 2020 question. How are you doing, and just how is your family in this clusterfuck of a year?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, and yeah, me and mine, we are doing fine. It's of course a strange year and a strange period, which yeah. I come from an industry that was pretty much paralyzed by this situation, or at least parts of the music industry is. Yeah, of course it was really disappointing to when we understood that we had to postpone the album and such. And reschedule tours and all of that. It's a logistics nightmare, but I don't know. In this kind of situation, it's allowed to be disappointed, but then it's better to find a constructive focus and yeah, move on. It's a kind of situation where you need to have installed both a plan A, B, and C, I guess, because we don't know how long it's going to last, and yeah.
I obviously do not know exactly what the situation is like in Norway at the moment, where I assume you are right now, but how have you dealt with the isolation in particular? There are some people, I myself, for example, I think that isolation kind of works okay with me, but there are others who kind of thrive on more social situations. What has it been like for you?
I enjoy both solitude and that part of life as well. So I don't find that particularly difficult, and also the whole quarantine thing, especially in the beginning, I kind of didn't notice much because I've had been in a studio quarantine, working with the album and also the soundtrack for the Assassin's Creed Valhalla game for such a long time, and still have been in the time after with so much studio work. So I haven't really noticed that huge of a difference, to be honest.
So I have been following Wardruna for a few years. I connected through it because I like black metal, I like Gorgoroth, and I kind of kept track of what Gal and yourself were doing after you left the band. But for those who are unaware, how did Wardruna start? How did you move from something like Gorgoroth to create something like Wardruna? What was your personal interest in this truly fascinating genre?
Well, first of all, I kind of grew up being exposed to a lot of metal music, but also a lot of classical music and traditional music. So all of those three is something I've carried fascination for, and yeah, since I was a child. And I guess the idea of and that also goes with in regards to my interest for history and Nordic history and that stuff, and so the idea of a project like Wardruna is something I've carried along for a long time, since my early teens, I would say, the first sort of ideas and visions for it. But yeah, for a long time I played metal music. I have to say, at the time when I played in Gorgoroth, that was, in a way, I was almost on a personal level finished with the whole metal thing. It was not a very personal thing for me, and more a professional artistic thing, rather than very much a personally connected thing. And at some point I just felt that need growing increasingly to yeah, rethink everything and do something that was more in line with my own heart and personal passion and interest. And so the idea to do, yeah, the idea to do this project became more and more specific. There are so many things from the past that I felt was kind of forgotten and hidden away, and so giving voice to these things was something I really wanted to do. And this is something I was doing alongside playing in Gorgoroth as well for a while. Before it became more and more evident for me that this is what I should do, and this is what I want to spend my time doing. So I quit all the bands that I was sort of working with, Gorgoroth and a handful of other bands that I was frequently working with, but to sort of fully dedicate myself to Wardruna.
I think that it is quite interesting, because I know that I was, of course, reading some interviews that you did in order to prepare this one, and I noticed that in some of them you have mentioned that you are, for lack of a better word, I apologize if I'm not getting the terms completely correctly, a follower of Asatru or neo-paganism or something along those lines. Of course, you are free to kind of specify it, but at the same time, your music does not come off as what Christian music would be, which is kind of proselytizing for a specific belief system. So what was your interest in creating this, or rather, when did this start for you specifically? And why did you think that, of all things, music would be the way in which you would be able to express this truly fascinating and interesting historical and theological or religious or spiritual, if you will, background of Scandinavian paganism?
Well, yeah, first of all, I think that music is an art form that, perhaps above any other art form, has such an immense capability and potential of carrying meaning, yeah, conveying meaning. In terms of the spiritual or religious aspect of it, I have to say that I really hate preaching. I think that's serving personal truths as actual truths is not a very good thing, and is a problematic thing in this world, I think. I would go as far as to say it's harmful.
What I like with animism and these old traditions that are sort of born out of nature is that they are still as relevant as they have always been, but also because they are it's something you can relate to whether or not you're a religious person or a spiritual person or not. It's much more universal, it's much more timeless, and so I guess that's the core of my music. It's and why it's not also perceived as being
proselytizing for paganism.
And that's kind of the things we want to highlight. It's basically about man's relation to nature, to each other, and to something that is bigger than yourself. Whether or not it's a philosophical thing or a spiritual thing doesn't really matter. But when it comes down to it, it's something that all people relate to in some form or another. So diving into these old ideas about this, ideas that were sort of created and molded in a time where our relation to nature is something you can consider a bit more connected and pure than our modern way of it. And of course that's a change that happened a long time ago, and a process that started a long time ago. And I think some of these ideas are really worth remembering. And I guess that's the core of what we are doing with Wardruna.
I asked this not as a kind of trying to start a debate about faith or anything like that, but just as a way to clarify the terminology. Would you be so kind as to tell me what you mean by animism? What would be the basics of what you're talking about there? So if we were to say Christianity, we would say God had a son, he died for our sins. What would be the equivalent simplification of animism?
Animism is generally the thought that everything in nature has, well, some would say spirit, some would say frequency or energy, and I guess the when I say animism, if I do sort of if there is a message in my music, it would be that the problems we are in now, when sort of people have put them, we as a human species has put ourselves on top of nature as the rulers of nature. I think that problem became when we sort of took the sacredness out of nature. We stopped viewing nature as something sacred, something well, that all life should be respected in a way. And I think if you have a view like that, then the potential, I think that would benefit us all, basically. And animism, animism isn't a religion. Animism is more a concept, I would say. And within animism, there are tons of different belief systems and spiritual ways. It is something, but the general concept is that everything has a spirit or a soul or a frequency or energy.
And is it related, you'll have to forgive the ignorance, of course, to Scandinavian paganism of the Eddas, for example, of things like Wotan, etc.?
Yes and no. Yes, it is connected, but and it's rooted, I would say it's rooted in animistic ideas and polytheistic ideas. The idea that you don't only have one god, but several deities in a sense. And many of them are basically personifications of different aspects of nature and human nature, one could say.
I really appreciate that you took the time to answer that, because nobody really likes to be asked about religion because they think that they're going to start into a debate about religion. So I really appreciate.
I find these things very interesting, and yeah, on a personal level, I just so that is also stated that I don't define myself as an Ausatru or any specific. If I have to give a name to it, I'm an animist. But I don't follow any specific religions. Or for me, personal belief is something that is always moving, always growing, always changing. As am I. I'm not the same person I was yesterday, potentially. You know, it's. I don't think it's a necessarily healthy thing to be too
predisposed.
Yeah, like everything is. You find a truth, and it has to be that way. And this is what I'm going to believe for the rest of my life. For me, it's more of a thing that grows along with my own personal growth.
Well, I did read in one of your interviews that you mentioned that, and this wasn't an attempt on your part to kind of throw shit at anybody else's religion, but that yours was very much based on the idea of personal responsibility. Nobody came here to die for you. Nobody came here to redeem you. You are responsible for your own life and for your own destiny.
I do believe that, or I do find it more logical. Yeah, like in the Norse corpus, there is no. Nobody died for your sins in a way. The gods help those who help themselves in a way. So responsibility is always your own.
In the last few years, as I am sure you have noticed from playing at countless heavy metal festivals, folk music, not folk metal, but folk music, has become quite popular among metal fans. Besides Wardruna, of course, we have bands like Skald from France or Heilung from Denmark/Germany and other countries. Both of them have reached really high levels of popularity. Why do you think European folk music, particularly Scandinavian folk music, is having such a significant revival, not just in general, but perhaps specifically among metal fans?
Well, in terms of why this kind of music appeals to metal, people who are into metal, I think that's quite logical, because metal has the aesthetics of metal have always been very much connected to both history, to history, but also to medieval kind of tonality. Also, like Norwegian metal music is very much connected to traditional tonalities. As well, even symphonic, which is also the case, and I guess that and also it's a genre that is so has been for as long as I think a lot of people met Norse mythology through metal music, basically. Yeah. So when I think both in terms of tonality, thematics, aesthetics, that this makes very much sense with why metal people would connect to it, and also, but. Musically and thematically, if you look outside the metal world as well, I think there is a general that there is a lot of I think there is many people on this planet who are very much searching for some form of connectiveness to something, to nature or other things, and one of the places it is natural to look is to these nature-based religions, to pre-Christian cultures and stuff like that. And in terms of the Norse tradition, we kind of got we were allowed to keep our traditions for almost 1,000 years, longer than the rest of Europe. So that means we preserved much more than the rest of Europe. Even almost up until modern day, a lot of the pagan ways survived. And so I think for many people, they see the Norse tradition as a sort of a gateway to their own pre-Christian culture, because fact is, when you go far enough back in time, you see how strikingly similar all of these nature-based traditions are, whether or not it's Iberic or
well, I'm originally from Latin America, and in Latin America we also have the same similar, like the pre-Columbus creeds are also very much based on this idea of spirits joining different, like every living thing is united by spirits.
Absolutely. So I find it quite logical why this fascination is there. And of course, I don't know, the whole Viking thing also is, it's they made such an impact on they ruled their time basically in Europe. So of course that sort of stamp in history is fascinating for people. So I understand it on many different levels why this fascination for Nordic culture is there.
And well, and adding of course to that current fascination on Nordic culture is all of the popular culture issues that are now precisely touching upon this. I mean, your own personal career has been quite interesting in that regard, because besides your drumming origins in black metal bands like Gorgoroth, you've also had the opportunity to work on soundtracks for the series Vikings, which was extremely popular and that brought Wardruna a tremendously larger number of fans. And now you also participated in the development of the soundtrack for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. How did all of this come about, and how has that experience been like?
In terms of Vikings, they basically they for the first season I know that they struggled a lot with finding like the right soundscape and did a lot of different things, and so a short period before they premiered, I was contacted by them. They wanted to use I think 6 or 7 of our songs in some of the episodes, and I don't know, they were really happy with how that turned out. And so for the second season I was contacted if I wanted to and asked if I wanted to join Trevor Morris, who is the main composer of the game, to join on this working on the soundtrack. And I did that, and also in addition to that, worked a lot with the stuff that goes on in front of the camera of musical input, like everything from battle cries to drunken songs or funeral songs and that kind of things, whenever actors were singing stuff. Or
one of the things that are very fascinating about musicians such as yourself is that you are often referring to a period of time from which obviously we do not have surviving records or anything where we can actually say this is how it sounded. What is the process for a band like Wardruna to actually figure out how to do justice to a style of music and to a genre itself that obviously there isn't a clear record of how things actually were at the time?
Well,
and by all means, feel free to correct me if I'm completely wrong.
You're not completely wrong, but well, first of all, I have to say that Wardruna is not about trying to replicate music from any specific time period. That's sort of not the premise. However, we do study all the primary sources as much as we can to sort of have a solid standing point that before going into the intuitive creative processes. Now by exact records you mean, of course, notation. There are no scores from Viking Age, but there are other things. There is a large number of other things that can make quite clear indications of what music might have sounded like back then. there are some of the instruments actually have a living tradition of being used, and we know for a fact that tonalities didn't really change much within some of them, and other instruments are so limited in what you can and cannot do on them, to meaning that almost whatever you do on them, it's going to be within a very close parameter or range of something you can call authentic. And then you have the poetry, and when you can compare that to later traditions, that can give you some quite a bit of insight as well. We have instruments that only work with the harmonic scale, for instance. That gives you a very strong indication. The list is long. It's a giant jigsaw of different things that can point you in quite a clear direction of how things might have sounded. But of course, certain things we cannot know for sure. That's absolutely true. But there is quite a bit of things that we can determine.
That's fascinating, and I really appreciate that you elaborated a little bit on that, because I think that many people don't realize that for a band such as your own, there is a lot of study. It isn't just about, okay, let's sit down and write the songs, which is in itself a difficult task, but also about understanding the period that you are paying tribute to through your music. So I really appreciate that you explained that.
I have to say that the period of which we take our instruments from is also very big. It's a lot of people think it's about Viking Age, but that's not correct. It's you know, our instruments range from Stone Age through Bronze Age and Migration period, Viking Age, medieval times, and even modern input. So
in 2020, we were supposed to see the release of Kvitravn. Due to COVID-19, it had to be pushed back to 2021. What can you tell about this album to all of those unfortunate souls who haven't had the opportunity to listen to it yet?
Yeah, what to say? Well, it's for me, it's a continuation of what we did with the Runic trilogy. It follows the same creative concept. It follows the same kind of instrumentation. Of course, there is a development in that also. And in terms of thematics, it's also familiar terrain. It's a lot of the same. Yeah, we wander in the same universe, you can say. But I would say the change is that thematic-wise, this album goes more into detail. It's like zooming more into the specifics. And it also, I would say, it dives more into a human aspect. I mean, it goes into different ways of how traditions and sort of concepts of how a human defined itself through studying or looking into these older ways of viewing these things, basically. So in that sense, you can also have a feeling that it's more personal, which is a natural thing, and because it's also more about a human aspect.
Although I would certainly like to continue discussing Kvitravn, I'm afraid that we are out of time. So any final words for your many fans who are certainly looking forward to Kvitravn, but also who are currently enjoying the soundtrack or the game of Assassin's Creed Valhalla? Any final words for them?
Yeah, I'm really happy about the response we are receiving, the love we are receiving for our work. It means a lot. Of course, we would probably do it nonetheless, whether or not people liked it or not. But the fact that people are able to connect to it in such a high degree, it truly means a lot.